Thank you for joining the City and County of San Francisco press conference with Mayor London Breed, San Francisco Police Chief William Scott, and District Attorney Chesa Boudin. For Q&A, please state your name, outlet, and questions in the WebEx chat. And now we welcome Mayor London Breed.
Good morning, and thank you all so much for joining us here today. I appreciate the fact that we have our Police Chief Bill Scott and our District Attorney Chesa Boudin, who are both here today to talk about the challenges around violent crime in our city and how we plan to address it. We know that we've seen an uptick in violent crime in San Francisco and some really horrible events that have occurred. We've seen them on video, we've heard about them, we see people talk about them on Nextdoor, on social media and other outlets. As we speak, there sadly was just a homicide in the Bayview Hunters Point community. And when I think about what's happening in San Francisco, the violent crime, domestic violence, the attacks on our seniors, the gun violence, it's all too familiar. It reminds me of when I was growing up in public housing in San Francisco. Yes, I love my community, but there were so many days where I lived in fear because of the violence, because of the gun violence in particular, not knowing if a stray bullet might hit me or people that I love and I care about. It was all too common to walk down the street and be on high alert. It was all too common to be in a situation where you hear gunshots and you start to duck to the ground or the floor or what have you. What we're seeing today is hurtful, it's sad, it's heartbreaking, and I know that we are better than this. We saw a video of an innocent senior, Mr. Vikcha Ratnapakdi, being violently assaulted in the middle of the day. I can't even imagine what his family is going through right now. It was heartbreaking. And the fact that another human being would do that to an elderly senior in our community is one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen. The level of violence directed at a completely defenseless 84-year-old senior was shocking and intolerable. For Jack Palladino, a longtime San Franciscan and story detective, to lose his life being attacked for his camera right in front of his own home. I want to communicate my deepest sympathies to the families, the friends, and the loved ones of both Mr. Palladino and Mr. Ratnapakdi, because we know that this is something unexpected. To be able to walk in your neighborhood and feel safe is one of the basic things that we should have in a city like San Francisco. I know that they are suffering the horrific pain of losing people they love to senseless and vicious violence. When I think about the challenges we continue to face as a city, I know that incidents like this make people feel unsafe. No one should be afraid of taking a walk around the neighborhood or taking photographs, or a kid just watching fireworks like Jace was last year during the 4th of July in his community with other kids. 6 years old, lost to gun violence. I'm here with our Chief of Police and our District Attorney to let everyone know that violent crimes committed in our city will not be tolerated. Public safety is our top priority, and we are not pointing the finger. We are here to work collaboratively to make sure that we keep people safe. We each have a responsibility. If you commit a crime in San Francisco and you hurt someone, you will be held accountable to the fullest extent of the law. That is a commitment that I have from both our police chief and our district attorney. Attacks and crimes committed against our most vulnerable especially our seniors and our children, are unacceptable. I was raised by my grandmother, and watching that video, I could not help but imagine if that had happened to my grandmother, if someone had did that to her, had hurt her like that, had killed her like that. I don't have the words. I can't even begin to understand how anyone can think of hurting a defenseless senior. And I want to be clear. You will be held accountable by the police as well as the district attorney. There will be consequences. Let's dispel the myth right now that there are no consequences for committing crimes in San Francisco, especially, as I said, against our most vulnerable people. San Francisco police are on heightened alert and will pursue every case vigorously to bring you to justice if you try to rob or attack members of our community in San Francisco. I don't care if you are a San Francisco resident or a Bay Area resident. You will be held accountable. You will be brought to justice. The district attorney will hold you accountable, and you will feel the full weight of the law, just as his charging announcement that he will make will illustrate today. Look, I believe in second chances. I believe that people are better than the worst things they have done. But when you cross that line, when you commit murder, when you take someone's life like that, we as a city and as a society, we have to hold you accountable for your actions. And you have to take responsibility for the pain and the suffering you caused. San Francisco is an incredible city. We are seeing, sadly, an uptick in crime. We know that as a result of this pandemic, people are home, people are frustrated, people are tired. Domestic violence is up, suicides are up, mental health challenges continue to persist. This is hard. But we also know, as leaders of this city, we have a responsibility. As mayor, I take the responsibility to protect and serve the people of San Francisco very seriously and as a high honor. And we will continue to do everything we can to support this city. I want to thank the San Francisco Police Department for their work in this case. It was a collaborative effort between a number of units, including parole, investigation, tactical company, special investigations, gang task force, homicide, station investigation teams, robbery detail, and the community liaison unit. I want to give a special thanks to Assistant Chief Mike Redmond and Sergeant Yosef Azim from our community liaison team, which we launched in October of 2020, for their outreach and support to the families of Mr. Ratnapakdi and Mr. Palladino. The victims' advocates in the district attorney's office, thank you as well for the work that you are also doing to help families get through this horrendous tragedy. The thing is, this is our response after the fact. But we are going to have to do more as a city to make sure that these crimes are not committed in the first place. And part of it is accountability. The other part is making sure that we are doing everything we can to keep our community safe, to make sure our police officers are out there patrolling and walking the beats. We have our neighborhood watches, and then providing opportunity so that people never, ever get to a place where they commit the kinds of crimes that we have seen in recent weeks that happened on our streets. I know that nothing can take away the pain and hurt of what these families are going through, but we are here to offer support, and we are here to make changes so that some of the mistakes and the challenges that existed that made it tough to bring people to justice will be repaired and will be addressed. And with that, I want to turn it over to our police chief, Bill Scott, to talk about specifically what the department has done. And I want to again commend the department for quickly apprehending the suspects in these cases. And now, Chief Scott, if you could say a few words about these investigations. And again, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Mayor Breed, and thank you for your leadership in bringing us together. And I want to thank District Attorney Boudin and his team who worked tirelessly with us through the weekend to bring these cases to resolution. I know I speak on behalf of the entire police department when I say how saddened we are by the tragic loss 2 families in our city are now suffering, and also for all the victims of violent crime. You mentioned Mayor's 6-year-old Jace Young, who sadly lost his life this past summer. This department is saddened by all of the loss, and we are committed to holding those accountable who hurt people in our city. To the family and friends of the neighbors of our victims, you are in our thoughts and prayers. Mr. Vicha Ratanapakdi and Mr. Jack Palladino were both seniors. Although the incidents were separate, each was assaulted in an unprovoked attack and in broad daylight. This kind of horrific violence has no place in our city. And we want families to know, all San Franciscans to know, that your city officials, starting with our mayor and with every member of the San Francisco Police Department, our district attorney, and everybody in the criminal justice system, stand united to work to ensure that justice is done in these cases. Although we have apprehended suspects in both of these cases, I would like to remind everybody that's watching, our media partners and the public, that these cases are still active and ongoing investigations. They're not over yet. Anyone with information or evidence is asked to please contact the San Francisco Police Department, and you may remain anonymous. You can call SFPD's 24-hour tip line at 1-415-575-4444 or text the tip to TIP 411 and begin the text message with SFPD. Now, a little bit about both cases. Vicha Ratanapakdi, on Thursday, January 28th at approximately 8:28 a.m., was the victim of an assault. San Francisco police officers responded to the assault at Anza Vista and Fortuna Avenues in the city's Anta Vista neighborhood. Officers arrived at the scene and discovered our 84-year-old male victim on the sidewalk. Our officers rendered aid and summoned San Francisco Fire Department medics to the scene, who promptly transported Mr. Ratanapakdi to the hospital for life-threatening injuries. In their initial investigation, our officers established that a male suspect ran at the victim from across the street, pushed him to the pavement, and then fled with a female associate. Based on an initial investigation led by our Station Investigations Team, General Crimes Unit, our officers identified our suspect as 19-year-old Antoine Watson of Daly City. We also identified his female associate as 20-year-old Mylaisha Gu, also of Daly City. On January 29th, 2021, investigators obtained an arrest warrant for Mr. Watson for assault with a deadly weapon and elder abuse causing great bodily injury. On Saturday, January 30th, 2021, our investigators were notified that Mr. Ratanapakdi succumbed to his injuries, sadly. At that point, our homicide detail took over the investigation. On Saturday, January 30th, 2021, at approximately 8:45 p.m., officers from the San Francisco Police Department's Tactical Unit and the San Francisco Police Department's Homicide Detail served a search warrant on the 500 block of Lipson Street in Daly City. Officers located Mr. Watson and Ms. Gu, who were taken into custody without incident. Now for the case involving Mr. Jack Palladino. On January 28, 2021, at approximately 4:51 p.m., San Francisco police officers responded to a reported robbery at Page Street and Masonic Avenue in our city's Haight-Ashbury neighborhood. Arriving on the scene, officers discovered a 76-year-old male lying in the street. The male, our victim, Mr. Jack Palladino, was being treated by medics from the San Francisco Fire Department, who transported him to the hospital with life-threatening injuries. Witnesses on the scene reported seeing a suspect in the passenger side of a vehicle in a physical struggle over Mr. Palladino's camera. During the struggle, the vehicle sped away, causing Mr. Palladino to fall to the ground. SFPD investigators developed information that led to the identity of two suspects, 24-year-old Lawrence Thomas of Pittsburgh, California, and 23-year-old Tyjon Flournoy of San Francisco. On Friday, January 29th, 2021, Mr. Thomas was taken into custody without incident in the area of Middle Point Road and Hare Street in San Francisco. The following day, on Saturday, January 30th, 2021, Mr. Flournoy was located on the 2500 block of East 2nd Street in Reno, Nevada. He was taken into custody without incident. Yesterday, Monday, February 1st, 2021, sadly, Mr. Palladino succumbed to the injuries he sustained in that attack. This incident is now being investigated by the San Francisco Homicide Detail. In conclusion, on behalf of all of us in the San Francisco Police Department, first of all, I want to express our condolences to the family, friends, neighbors of these victims, and as I said, of all victims of homicide and violent crimes in our city. I want to express my appreciation to our members, the San Francisco Police Department members, who worked tirelessly over the last several days. Mayor Breed mentioned these units, but I just want to reiterate. Our Field Operations Bureau, Investigations Bureau, Special Operations Bureau, our Tactical Unit, Patrol Unit, Robbery Detail, Homicide Detail, our Community Liaison Unit, all work together to bring these cases to a quick conclusion, to hold the individuals responsible accountable. They gathered evidence, pursued leads, identified the suspects, and then successfully apprehended them without incident. We're also grateful to our partners in the Daly City Police Department and the FBI's Northern Nevada Safe Streets Task Force. Our partners in the San Francisco Fire Department also deserve recognition as well, as our medics responded immediately and worked heroically to save these victims' lives. And lastly, our partners at the District Attorney's Office, led by our District Attorney Chesa Boudin. Thank you for your leadership, and thank your team for their partnership on this cases and all cases that we have to work together on to resolve and bring these individuals to account for hurting people in our city. We will continue to do our jobs. And I want to reiterate what Mayor Breed said. For anybody who thinks that San Francisco is an easy touch, you need to think twice. For anybody who thinks that they can attack elderly individuals in our city, you need to think twice. For anybody who thinks that you can murder a 6-year-old child enjoying 4th of July with his family, you need to think twice. We will bring every resource to bear to bring you to an account, and we won't rest until that's done. Thank you, Mayor Breed, for your leadership, and thank you, District Attorney Boudin. And now we'll turn it over to District Attorney Boudin.
Thank you, Mayor Breed. Thank you, Chief Scott, for your comments, for your leadership, and for your unwavering commitment to public safety. I also want to give a special thank you to all of our first responders who work tirelessly to provide support and assistance to people who've been injured in crime and who have done a phenomenal job investigating these cases and other cases that we partner with the police department to hold people who cause harm in our communities accountable. As Chief Scott said, these cases are still under investigation. There is much more work to be done, but the police have done a phenomenal job and a quick and expedient job in identifying suspects and arresting suspects and giving us the information we need to hold them accountable. Now, the three of us, the mayor, the chief of police, and myself, stand here united in our shared goal to keep San Francisco safe for all of its residents. I know that the recent tragic and violent events have made many in San Francisco, especially our most vulnerable, our elderly, feel unsafe. We are here today to inform you that we will hold those who committed these horrific crimes accountable, period. Prosecuting violent crimes is and always will be my top priority. We are also here to reassure you and to remind you that despite these recent terrible crimes, San Francisco is and will continue to be a safe city. We will make sure of that. You have all of our commitments that we will defend the safety of our communities, no matter what it takes. It is especially important that we help elderly San Franciscans to feel safe and to be safe. We know that the pandemic has hit the elderly particularly hard and made them especially vulnerable, and we will go to whatever lengths it takes to keep our communities, our elderly, our AAPI, our young children at 4th of July celebrations and birthday parties and wherever it may be, safe. Now, Chief Scott already mentioned some of the facts of the case, and I just want to briefly reiterate. In the killing of Visha Ratanapakdi, the 84-year-old man who was senselessly and violently attacked while taking a walk in his own neighborhood, I want to commend the extraordinarily effective and quick police work in this case that arrested two suspects who were not previously known to the police. They did a phenomenal job. And as Chief Scott said, the investigation is ongoing. My victim services team stands ready to support the family. We have already met with the family, and our heart goes out to the Ratanapakdi family for this absolutely heinous and unimaginable, devastating loss. I know that many in the AAPI community are in pain. Many have experienced violence or hate over the last year, and many feel secondary trauma from the shocking video of Mr. Ratanapakdi's murder. My entire office condemns violence against anyone, but particularly against the elderly and the vulnerable members of the AAPI community who have been unfairly targeted during this pandemic. Now, the police have given us enough evidence in this case that we made a decision, and we are pleased to announce that decision. We will be filing murder charges against Mr. Watson. We will be seeking his detention. I have directed my staff to file those charges today, and we expect he'll be arraigned in open court tomorrow afternoon, and we will file a detention motion seeking his pretrial detention pending trial on murder charges. I also want to correct some of the confusion and misinformation that we've seen on social media and other places. Mr. Watson was never arrested and released in San Francisco. He has never been released on this case. From the moment the police took Mr. Watson into custody after this killing, he has been held in custody, and my office will continue to seek his detention going forward. In fact, Mr. Watson has no prior convictions or criminal charges in San Francisco ever. At times of tremendous loss and high emotions like this one, it's common for misinformation to spread, and it's essential that we focus on facts and verified data so that we can hold Mr. Watson, the man we believe responsible for this death, accountable. Also want to mention the other tragic murder that occurred in San Francisco against an elder, vulnerable victim last week. Last Thursday, two men tried to rob Jack Palladino, a beloved, well-known, heroic investigator outside his home. Yesterday, Mr. Palladino passed away. Mr. Palladino was a San Francisco legend, someone who dedicated his career to pursuing justice and truth. It is fitting that his own camera helped capture evidence that we expect will help us prove this case to a jury. We know that this tragedy, like the other one last week, affected the entire San Francisco community, and our hearts go out to Mr. Palladino's family for their loss. This is unacceptable, it is intolerable, and there will be consequences for the people responsible. My office filed numerous felonies against the two men that we believe committed this crime, Lawrence Thompson and Tyjon Flournoy. Again, I want to commend the police department for extraordinary quick work in identifying the suspects and bringing them both into custody without incident. Because we initiated the paperwork while Mr. Palladino was still alive and on life support, we initially charged the case as attempted murder with a variety of other charges and have filed detention motions to keep both men in custody. As soon as we receive an official opinion from the medical examiner determining the cause of death, we plan to remove the attempted and charge both men with murder. We will continue to seek their detention in this case, and we will continue to work together with all of our public safety partners, especially the police department and the mayor's office, to promote public safety, to promote accountability, and to make absolutely crystal clear to anyone who has a doubt or a second thought that San Francisco will not tolerate violence, will not tolerate preying on elderly or vulnerable members of our community. That if you come here or if you live here and choose to commit violent crimes, you will be held accountable. These murders are still at early stages. We will be prosecuting both as murders. I've made that decision personally, and I've personally made the decision to seek detention in both cases. We stand here together with a very simple message. We are here to promote public safety. We are here to hold people accountable who commit violent crimes in our communities. We will stand by our AAPI community. We will stand by the elderly and the young and anyone who is vulnerable to violent crimes, and we condemn violence and hate in all its forms. Chief Scott, the mayor, and I are all committed to working together tirelessly to do whatever it takes to promote public safety in San Francisco and to ensure that San Francisco is not only a safe city, but that it is a city in which everyone feels safe. For the families of Jace Young, for the families of Jack Palladino, for the families of Mr. Ratanapakdi, for every single family, for every single member of our community, we are here for you, we have your back, and we will keep you safe. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Chief Scott, for your collaboration, for your partnership, and for your leadership.
Thank you to our district attorney, our police chief, and before we open it up to questions, I just want to really put this into perspective, because as I said earlier in my remarks, I grew up in a community where, sadly, as much as I love my community, I lived in fear. And one of the things that we have to do, and I take full responsibility to do, is to make sure that people in this city are not living in fear. So those of you who inflict that fear with your actions by attacking the residents of this city, whether it be assault with your physical hands or with a gun or with a weapon, in any case, we will be aggressive in our pursuit and aggressive in our prosecution. Do not come to San Francisco thinking you are going to victimize another person here. Whether you're trying to come here to rob somebody, assault somebody, or what have you. Everything is on the table for us to pursue when you cross that line. We will be watching, we will be vigilant, we will hold the people in these cases accountable, because we are not going to live in fear. We are going to change that in San Francisco. Thank you both for joining us, and now we'll open it up to questions from the press.
Thank you, Mayor Breed. Thank you, Chief Scott and District Attorney Boudin, for your remarks. Before we begin the question and answer portion, we're going to take a moment to allow reporters to submit any final questions they may have into WebEx chat. We'll be right back. Thank you for your patience. The first question is for District Attorney Boudin from Alex B. from the SF Business Times. How many small business owners do not feel safe because they have been hit increasingly by break-in burglaries and vandalism during the pandemic. And there is widespread perception that your office is choosing not to pursue prosecution of these cases. What are you doing to assure the victims that there are consequences for property crimes in San Francisco?
Well, thank you so much for the question, and thanks to all of our small business owners and business community for helping to create jobs and for weathering a historically unprecedented year of challenges. I know how hard this year has been for everyone, and in many ways, no one more than small businesses because of the constant challenges around health restrictions and around decline in tourism. And we know that it has been a year in which many businesses have closed for good, and we are doing everything we can. I want to commend the mayor for her leadership in helping to support small businesses. And I also want to assure you that we prosecute the vast majority of the cases you referenced that the police bring us to prosecute. We know that these are often difficult cases to solve and to prosecute, but we do file charges in the majority, and we do hold people accountable. But we do more than that. We also have a pilot program in District 5 to help small businesses that have been harmed by vandalism or broken windows during the pandemic get reimbursement for their expenses. And I hope we can bring that pilot program citywide so that we can do more to help every single small business that has suffered from vandalism or graffiti or broken windows over the past year, regardless of whether or not we're able to prosecute the case. But I assure you, we do hold people accountable. The majority of cases police bring us, we are able to prosecute. And that's something that we're absolutely committed to continuing to do. We have a wide variety of tools that we use to hold people accountable, depending on the strength of the evidence, the dollar cost of the damage, the prior history, if any, of the individual. And we look at every single case the police bring us, and we take them seriously. We'll continue to do that.
Thank you, District Attorney Boudin. Your next question comes from Gregory Richardson of the San Francisco community news, Good News TV. Is there no bail set for Jack Palladino's murder?
We have asked the court to impose a detention order, meaning no bail. I don't believe the court has yet ruled on that request, but the individuals are currently in custody, both on the initial case we filed while Mr. Palladino was still alive, as well as on another hold that we worked with the police department to put in place to ensure that they would not be able to get out of custody pending an opinion from the medical examiner. So the short answer is there is no way they will be released, and we will be asking the court to make a formal ruling as soon as we're able, holding both men in custody without bail. We know that these cases are of tremendous concern to all of us. That's why we're here today. And I want to reiterate what the mayor said, what the chief of police said. These cases are our priority, and we will do everything in our power to hold the men accountable who caused this harm and to keep the community safe from them while the case is pending.
Thank you. Your next question comes from Stella Chan of CNN. Can you elaborate on how Palladino helped crack his own case?
Mr. Palladino was a renowned and famous private investigator. Many described him as having a sixth sense when something was off or something was wrong in his own neighborhood or anywhere that he worked. And on the day of his death, on the day of the attack on him that caused his death, he left the house with his high-end investigative camera to take photos. And as Chief Scott said, the investigation is still ongoing. But we know that Mr. Palladino took photos right before his injury-causing death of the car that the assailants were in. That photo we expect will be used in court as part of our case to hold the two men that caused his death accountable. It's an unusual turn of events for someone who was killed to play a role in the investigation of their own case. And here, Mr. Palladino, an investigator to the very last day of his life, to the very last act of his life, took photos that helped confirm police work identifying the two assailants in this case. And as I said, we expect we'll be able to use the photo he took, his last photo, as evidence in this case when it goes to trial.
Thank you, District Attorney Boudin. At this time, we'll now continue with Mayor Breed for questions. Mayor Breed, this question comes from Dan Simon of CNN. There is a real perception that quality of life has gone way down. People are fleeing the city. What can you do to help restore confidence that San Francisco is not going down the drain?
Well, let me start by asking, is there any other major city in this country that doesn't deal with similar challenges like we do in San Francisco? There may not be a more beautiful city than San Francisco, but the fact is we are a major city and we have challenges like any other major city. We know that this pandemic has caused a lot of people to realize that they may not, since they're working from home, that they may not necessarily need to be in the city, especially because most people choose to live in a city like San Francisco because of the restaurants and the nightlife and the entertainment and the things to do. And those things don't exist right now because of this pandemic. I have faith, I have confidence that despite the challenges that exist in our city and other major cities in the country, that when we begin to reopen, that more people are going to return to San Francisco. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. Because the fact is, when you look at what happened in this pandemic, San Francisco, the second most dense city in the country, with the lowest death rate of any major city in the country, how we've handled this virus has been a national model for the rest of the country to follow. And how we will continue to address the challenges that persist in our city is something that we will work on. We will build more housing. We will keep our residents safe. We will put forth innovative plans and projects to address homelessness and the challenges that we face together. And I'm confident that people will begin to not only return to San Francisco to visit as tourists for conventions and other things, which they so frequently do, especially because they do feel safe to be here in light of what's happened with COVID, that they will start to return their businesses and other things that have existed before. People are going to want to go back to cities, and San Francisco will be at the top of the list.
Thank you, Mayor. At this point, we'll continue with questions with Chief Scott. Chief Scott, your first question comes from Dominic Fracassa from the SF Chronicle. Are there any indications so far in the investigation to suggest that the assault of Vicha Ratanapakchi was a hate crime?
Not at this point, but as I said, the investigation is still ongoing. There's nothing at this point to indicate that it was a hate crime, but we have still some investigative steps to take. So we're not ruling out anything, but at this point, no.
Thank you. The next question comes from Shikiao Peng of Singtao Daily. After a series of violent crimes targeting the AAPI elderly over the past years, what plans does our city have to protect our elderly and prevent similar incidents from happening again and again? What will the city do to make sure our elderlies do not live in fear?
Well, first and foremost, we have to hold people accountable. And there have been a number of crimes against elderly members of the AAPI community. And a large amount of those cases we've solved, and those people have been held accountable for the harm that they caused. That's the first thing. But even before that, we will do everything in our power to try to prevent these crimes from happening in the first place. We spend a lot of time and effort on analyzing crime, analyzing trends, trying to deploy our officers, our beat officers, our foot patrols, our specialized units where we believe we can make the biggest difference on preventing these crimes. Some of our high foot traffic corridors where people get robbed, some of our areas, Chinatown or North Beach, where you have a lot of tourist activity, and we see a lot of those opportunistic crimes. We have to deploy, and the public has to see us out there. People feel safer in general when they see police out and visible. And it's sometimes challenging. We also have to respond to our radio calls and our calls for service, but we have to do that. And I know our mayor has been extremely supportive on that. We continue to get that support, and we have to put our officers where they have the best bang for their buck. The third thing, working with the community members that are impacted by these types of crimes. We've invested a lot of time and effort in that as well. Trust is a big deal. People have to feel like they can trust their police department. That's why we are so intent on making sure that people understand it's not about your immigration status. It's not about where you come from. If you have a problem or if you want to work with us, work with us. We're here for you. And that community outreach is really, really important to building community trust. And I think we've done that. We will continue to do more of that. The mayor mentioned our community liaison unit that with her leadership, we were able to stand up in October. Part of this process, particularly after people have been victimized, is we felt that we can provide better service to families. The district attorney mentioned, they have their victim services unit, but in between the time, the case gets prosecuted and we're investigating, we felt that we can do more on our end. So that's what that community liaison unit is all about. It's really reaching out to families. It's really reaching out to the communities most impacted and working with those communities in a very direct and consistent way. And we hope one of the byproducts, the positive byproducts of that will be better trust, people reporting crime when it happens, because if we don't know about it, it's hard to do anything about it. And also a more effective community partnership that builds resiliency in our city. A lot of what we try to tell people when we're talking to them is don't make yourself an easy target. Don't do things, don't exhibit patterns that, going to the bank and withdrawing large sums of money and things like that. And, people watch for these things and they take advantage of it. There are predators out there. So we're going to do those types of things. There's no easy or magic answer, but just be assured that the things that I just mentioned are happening, will happen even in a greater degree as we move forward. And we're going to do everything we can to prevent people from being victimized, particularly from not only the API community, but all communities. I mean, this is, we have issues all over our city, and there's not a community or demographic that's not impacted by this issue. And we serve all.
Thank you, Chief. The next question comes from Chris Weicker of CBS News. What steps are being taken to stop the drug traffic in the Tenderloin?
Well, first of all, there's enforcement. There is quite a bit of enforcement on a variety of levels. We've worked with our local partners, our district attorney's office. We have our narcotics unit that works closely with our district station in the Tenderloin, the captain there and his team. We've done some very specific and focused efforts with the Tenderloin team. We also work with our U.S. attorneys on some of the cases that meet a federal threshold. And those cases have resulted in over 150 arrests. But that has to be consistently done, has to be consistently applied. And that's not going to be the answer to this issue. That has to happen, but it's not going to be the answer to this issue. So the other side of that equation is how do we address a lot of what drives drug sales in the first place? And that's the demand for drugs. We have a lot of people in need, a lot of hurting people in our city who need services. Doesn't necessarily mean they're criminals. It means they're addicted. And that's the other part that we are working with our health partners, our Department of Public Health, our community-based organizations, our nonprofits, to help better address that issue. We all have to work together, though. We can't do this work in silos. I mean, there's a lot of work being done, and there's the will here in the city to impact this problem, but we all have to work together. And I think that's one thing that we are working to get better at. It's a very complicated issue. There's no simple answer to this, but just be assured, the arrests are happening, the enforcement is happening, the community partnerships is happening, and we just got to stay at it.
Thank you, Chief Scott. Our final question is for District Attorney Boudin. District Attorney, the question comes from Tom Jensen of NBC Bay Area. Why was Mr. Flerney not charged and held accountable when he was in a car where a murder occurred last year?
Well, thank you for the question. As some of you are aware, there was a murder that occurred in the Tenderloin area in December of 2019. That occurred before I took office. The police were investigating the case for a number of months. They did ultimately arrest 4 men who were believed to have been in the car that the shooter was in at the time of the murder. We filed murder charges against 2 men in that case, and they both remain in custody pending those murder charges today. Those 2 men were the men we could prove, we believe we can prove, are the shooter and the driver. The other 2 men who were in the case were arrested really because they were in the same time, in the same location at the same time. There was not nearly enough evidence for us to be able to file charges. We are continuing to work with the police in investigation and in prosecuting the murder charges that we have filed. It's not uncommon for arrests to occur as part of an investigative process, and those arrests cannot always result in criminal charges being filed. But I want to commend the San Francisco Police Department for their work in that case. As I said, the murder itself took place before I was even in office. The police department continued to investigate the case for months, and ultimately we were able to file criminal charges against the 2 people we believe we can prove are responsible for the murder, and we will continue to prosecute that case. I understand that there was a request as well for me to answer this question in Spanish, so let me do that as well for the Spanish language outlets here. Como algunos bien saben, nosotros colaboramos muy cercanamente con la Policía de San Francisco. En diciembre de 2019, antes de que yo asumí mi puesto, mi cargo, había un homicidio cerca del Tenderloin en San Francisco. Muchos meses después, gracias a bien hecho trabajo por la policía arrestó a 4 hombres involucrados con el auto, de lo cual disparó la persona quien mató la víctima en ese caso en 2019. De los 4 personas, nosotros pudimos levantar cargos de homicidio contra 2. Los 2 que nosotros podemos comprobar a un jurado estaban directamente involucrados en el homicidio, es decir, la persona que manejó el auto y la persona que disparó la pistola que mató la persona, la víctima. Las otras 2 personas estaban nada más presentes y no tenemos suficientes pruebas para levantar cargos. Y por ese motivo estamos avanzando con los 2 casos de homicidio que archivamos con la Corte. Las 2 personas están detenidas en la cárcel desde cayeron presos por la policía y vamos a seguir colaborando cercanamente con la policía siempre para hacer cumplir la ley. Bien sabemos que es imposible levantar cargos en 100% de los arrestos. Muchas veces un arresto es una parte del proceso de investigar y no siempre va a resultar en cargos archivados con la Corte. Pero en este caso, gracias a muy buen trabajo por la policía, sí pudimos levantar cargos de homicidio en contra a 2 personas y siguen presos hasta la fecha de hoy.
Thank you, District Attorney Boudin. There are no additional questions. This concludes today's press conference. Thank you to Mayor Breed, Chief Scott, and District Attorney Boudin for your time. For future questions, please email dempress@sfgov.org. Thank you and have a nice day.